Hello and welcome back to another Flutter tutorial. In this video, we will see how to use Bloc for state management in Flutter with the help of a real-world example. Before that, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe and support. So let's start. As usual, I will be starting with an empty template with just a container set as home with a white background. So let's create a new folder, screens. I'm going to create a new screen, album screen, which is a stateful widget. Album screen. Let's import the material package, and the build function will return a scaffold with an bar, and the title is going to say albums. And let's set the body, which is a container with a child. Let's write a new function, body, which is going to return a column, and the children, let's leave it empty for now. We'll be filling it later. Now let's go back to our main.dot file and set this screen as home. So home, album screen. You can see the output in the simulator on the right side. Now let's create a new folder named API. Here we will write some services to get the data. So let's create a new file, services.dart. Let's go to the internet and get some fake JSON services so that we can use it in our example. So if you go to jsonplaceholder.typico.com, you can see so many fake services. I'm going to use this one, the album service. Now to get the data from the service, we need to have the HTTP package. So let's copy it and open the pubspec YAML file and paste it under the dependencies. So for this demo, we need the Flutter block, equatable, and the HTTP package. Make sure to call Flutter packages get and install the package for your application. Now let's go to the services.dart file and import the HTTP package. Now I'm going to create a new class which is abstract called albums repo. The next thing is we need to have a model class for our response. So let me copy the response and go to app.cubetype.io, and we can generate the model classes from here. So let me copy and paste it here and give it the name album and copy the model class. And I'm going to create a new folder and create a new file. I'm going to name it albumslist.dart and paste the model classes there. Okay, now we have the model classes for parsing the JSON from the service. Alright, now let's go back to our services.dart file and write a new function, future list of album. So this function is going to return a list of albums. Okay, so this is a abstract class. So let's create a new class, album services, which is going to implement this abstract class. So we need to override that method and implement it. So URI is equal to URI.https, and we need the authority and the path. So create a static constant base URL is equal to, let me copy the URL, paste it there, and another static constant get albums, that is /albums. Okay, and we can use the base URL as authority, and the path will be get albums. And this method is going to be asynchronous since it is a web service call. So response is equal to await http dot get and pass in the URI, and the response will be the list of albums. So list of albums is equal to album from JSON and pass in the response dot body. As you have seen, the album from JSON is the method from the model class that we generated. Alright, now we have the response parsed and returned, but we haven't written any code to catch the errors, correct? For that, I'm going to create a new class and I'm going to name it exceptions.dart, and let's write some classes that will represent the different types of errors. The first one is the no internet exception. It's going to have a message and the constructor will accept the message. And similarly, we are going to have the no service found exception, which is 404, and another exception, invalid format exception, and another exception which is unknown exception. So if any of the above exceptions are not caught, we are going to throw the unknown exception. Alright, so our basic setup is ready. Now we are going to actually start with the block. So for that, I'm going to create a new folder. So for each service, I'm going to create a new folder, and here we have only one service. So a folder block, and within that I'm going to create a new folder, albums. So this block, whatever I write in here inside the albums folder, is for the albums list service, okay, and the related UI. So block.dart. So what the block does is it simply takes an event and a state, and it's going to return a new state which will be used to update our UI. That's what we are going to do in few minutes, so watch till the end. So as I said, let's start by creating the events. So events.dart, and under file states.dart, and let's go to the events file and create the event album events, and here we have only one event, which is fetch album. Our events part is done. Now let's try to identify the states when we are trying to fetch albums. For that, I'm going to create an abstract class album state, which is going to extend equatable. Equatable will help us to compare two objects with the help of the properties of that objects that we provide. So let's declare the states. The first one is the album's loading state. So these are our states. It can be any name or anything you want. Okay, so it's telling us to override a method. So the method we are going to override is to help equatable to compare two objects with help of its properties. So for simplicity, we'll keep it empty. Now let's declare the other states, which is the album loaded state. So these are the states that we are going to receive in the UI, so name it accordingly. The third one is the album list error or album error, whatever you want. So the albums loaded state will have the list of albums that we receive in the UI. The constructor is going to accept list of albums, and similarly in the error it's going to have a error member variable, and the constructor will accept the error. So in our case, the error can be any type of the exceptions that we declared earlier. Our states are also complete now. Let's go to the block.dart file and create a new class, albums block, that's going to extend block. And as I said earlier, it's going to accept events and state. So here, album events and albums state. Import the Flutter block and create a constructor that will accept a initial state. So albums block and call super with the initial state. Sorry, I forgot to declare a initial state class here in the states. So let's do it now. Albums init state, and you can have your own initial values here. I'm going to keep it empty for this demo, and we need to override one more method, that is the map event to state that is needed by block. So let's implement that method. Alright, now we have the event here. So when we trigger some event, it's going to come here, and we need to identify each event and act accordingly. So let's declare at the variable final albums repo, so that this block will have access to the services, so that it can call and get the data from these services. And at the variable list of album, this is optional, you can have it inside the map event to state as well. Alright, we need to initialize the albums repo variable. So pass it with the constructor in the albums block. Now let's go to the map event to state method. This will all make sense in a short while, so don't worry about it. So here we will identify which is the event. Here we have only one event, which is fetch albums, and when this event occurs we need to return the state to the UI. So call yield albums loading, which is the first state. But before that we need to make this method async star, then only we can call yield. So let me tell you what yield and return will do. Yield and return will both return whatever is coming after that. So here yield is going to return the album's loading state, but the difference is that it's not going to terminate this function like return, but it will continue executing the next line and the lines coming after that. But if you are using return, it's going to terminate the function there. Return albums loading will terminate there, and the rest of the code will not be executed if you are using return. So that's what yield can do. You can return data in between the execution. Alright, so initially we are returning the albums loading state and we are calling the albums list service. So once we have the albums, we are going to return the albums loaded state. So remember, albums loaded state has albums parameter. So if you go there, you can see we already declared the albums parameter. So we can pass in the albums there, so that when we return or yield the albums loaded state to the UI, we will have the data as well, so that we can update in the UI. Alright, so we have the very basic setup ready without the error catching. So let's try to implement this in the UI. So let's go to the main.dart file, and here comes the main part. We need to wrap the screen that wants to listen to the corresponding block updates with a widget called block provider. So album screen is the screen that want to get the updates from the albums block, right? So we want to wrap the album screen with the block provider. So that's what we are going to do next. So remember, whichever screens or widgets you want to get updates from a particular block, you need to wrap those widgets with the block provider. So block provider create, that's going to take a context and we need to return the corresponding block. So here it's the albums block. So albums block, and albums block will accept the albums repo. So here it is the albums services. So album screen needs to get data from the album services. So the block provider will provide the data to the child, which is the album screen. Now we need to update the UI. So I am overriding the init state and calling a new method load albums, which is an asynchronous method, and we need to import the Flutter block here, which will provide us with the context. So context dot block, and that is of type album block, which is a stream controller. So we fire events by adding event to it. So the event that we are firing is fetch albums. So this will fire the block, which is going to come here and it's going to return the album's loading state to the UI. But we haven't written any code to listen it in the UI, right? So let's write a block builder here, which is a widget that we can use to update the UI. So pass in the albums block and album state, and it's going to take the builder, and builder needs to return the UI based on the state. So that will accept the context and album state, and the state will have the data that we are returning from the block. So if you go back to the album state class, you can see the different data that we are returning. So let's check if the state is album list error. So if it is error, we want to show a text with an error in the UI, and if the state is albums loaded, that means the service is a success and we have the data. So otherwise we will show a progress indicator. So you can see in the UI it's showing a progress indicator. Now let's write a method to list the albums in the UI. So method list, which will take a list of albums as parameter, and it's going to return a expanded widget which is going to have a child which is a list view builder, and the item builder will have the context which we are ignoring for now, and the second parameter is the index, and get the corresponding album from the index, and we will show the album dot title in a list view. Let's set the item count as well, which is the albums dot length. Alright, now let's use the list inside the albums loaded state. So list of albums is equal to state dot albums, and return list and pass in the albums. Now let's refresh the app and see if the data is loading. Okay, I refresh, but there is some error which we haven't caught yet. So when we trigger the event, it's going to come here and it's going to call the get albums list. So here we don't need the HTTPS because we already have it in the API. Right, let's refresh. Okay, now we have the data. Let me show you how the data flow is. So let's put a breakpoint here, and when we first load, it's going to the progress indicator, and second time it's coming to the albums loaded, and it has the list of albums which we are displaying in the UI. Okay, now let's try to catch the errors. For that, I'm going to put a try catch here and move the service call inside the try catch, and removing the on catch, removing the catch and replacing it with on socket exception. And the second one we are going to catch is the on HTTP exception, and the third one is format exception, and finally catch block. So all other errors will come to this catch block, and now we will return the error state back to the UI so that we can update the UI accordingly. So on socket exception, I'm going to return or yield the album list error, and the error is our custom exception, which is the no internet exception with the message no internet. So similarly, in on HTTP exception, we will change the exception to no service found exception, and the third one is the invalid format exception. Let's update this second error to no service found, and the third one to invalid response format, and inside the catch we will return the unknown exception with unknown error message. Now we will try to replicate an error. Okay, so you can see in the UI it's displaying error. Let's get the error from the state, which is the exception, and we'll get the message from that exception and see what is the error. So you can see that's the error. So that will be error dot message. So you can see that it's no internet. Alright, now let's create some widgets to display the error properly. So I'm going to say error, import the material package, and return a container with a text. It's going to accept a string message in the constructor, which is a named parameter, and the text will display the message. So these are all part of making widgets reusable. So I have made a couple of videos based on this. I'll be providing the link to it in the description. I think I have a conflict here. So let me rename the error to error text. Alright, now it's importing. Let's give it the message. We'll try to customize the widget again by giving a text style with a font size of 20 and a color of red. Now we will make it center. Alright, now to the center of the page. Now it looks good. So similarly, you can customize any widget so that you can use it throughout your application so that it becomes a reusable widget. So if you want to learn more about reusable widgets, I'll be providing the link to it in the description. So similar to that, let's try to customize our list row. So create list row.dart and create a widget list row that's going to return a container with a padding of 20 and a child, which is a column, with a main axis alignment to start. Sorry, not here. Main axis alignment to start and cross axis alignment to start. And this widget is going to accept album as parameter. So list row and album, and text will display album.title, and optionally you can display the user ID as well, which is an integer. Now we will go and replace the text in the list with the list row and pass in the album. Alright, now it looks good. Let's try to customize the title in the list view. So style, a new text style with a font size of 20. Okay, now it looks a little bigger, and let's add a divider as well. Alright. Similarly, let me add a custom loading indicator with a new class loading, and that's going to return an expanded widget with a child, center, and child, a circular progress indicator, and we will use this loading inside the block. Okay, now you can see that it's showing at the center. The reason behind creating all these reusable widgets is because in the second part of this tutorial we will be using Bloc to theme our app so that we can reuse these widgets and make our app look uniform. Now let's try adding a retry functionality when there is some error. So I am deliberately making an error, and let's go to the UI album screen, and we'll customize the message. So string message is equal to error dot message, and we will add tab to retry, and we will go to the error text widget, and we will centralize the content first, and we will add a new parameter to the error text widget, which is a function. So when we tap on the error text, it needs to trigger the reload of the albums, correct? So on tap, and let's wrap the container with a inkwell widget or a gesture detector, whichever you want, and call the on tap. And back in the UI, set on tap to call the load albums function. So here you can see it's trying to reload, but still it is error. Let's try to remove that error. Okay, so that way you can implement a retry functionality or any way you want. So this is one of the ways to do it. So that's the whole thing. So you can see we have different states here, and we will be triggering these states based on the events. So if you go to events, we have only one event here, and so this is a block file. So when we trigger the events with the state, this is going to return a new state. So initially it will be loading it will be returning back the loading event, and when it is loaded, and it will be returning back a albums loaded event. So when it is loading event, the block builder will receive the state, and we have the corresponding UI, which is the loading. And when it is loaded and we have the data, albums loaded will return the list of albums to the UI where we have set the albums. So when the UI receives it, we will display a list, and when there is some error, we will display an error widget. And with the help of Bloc, even you can make this widget stateless, and you can trigger this in some other way. So with the help of Bloc, you can make even the whole application stateless. So that's the beauty of Bloc. So make sure you add the block provider around the class you want to listen, and the services and the logic will be in the block. So that will return the appropriate state back to the UI, which will be which the block builder will listen, and we can update the UI. So that's the whole flow, and that's all in this video. If you like this video, or if you found this video useful, please don't forget to like, subscribe and share. That will be a big support for me. Also, please don't forget to hit the bell icon for notifications so that you will get instant notifications when I upload new videos. The second part of this tutorial will be coming soon. So please hit the bell icon, like, share and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video. Until then, bye.